Hello, everyone. Welcome to the webinar today. We're going to give folks about 3 more minutes to join, and then we'll be getting started. Good afternoon, everyone. I want to welcome you to today's webinar. I'm going to start by introducing myself. I am Candace Driscoll. I'm a senior policy analyst here at NGA in the Center for Best Practices. We're better known as NGA Solutions. I work in the Economic Opportunity Division, and I'm a member of the Human Services team. We are actually proud to announce that today's webinar is a cross-division webinar here at NGA Solutions, and it's being brought to you by not only the Economic Opportunity Division, but also the Health and Education Division. We want to thank the Health Resources and Services Administration, the Maternal and Child Health Bureau for their support in producing today's webinar for you all on the 2-gen approach. So I want to say welcome and thank you for joining us. Our goal for today's webinar is to highlight the 2-gen approach, not as a specific policy or program strategy, but rather as a framework that can be applied to various policy and program areas. We recognize that we have participants joining us from diverse expertise, and we hope that today's webinar is useful in helping you think or rethink about how you can promote greater well-being amongst the families that you serve using the 2-gen approach specifically. So I want to start by going over today's agenda, what we're going to cover during our time together. We'll start by providing a brief overview of NGA for those who may not be as familiar with our work. We'll then transition into an overview of the two-gen approach and share how NGA specifically has been investing in whole family work nationwide. Following that overview, we will then hear from two state leaders in Georgia and Colorado who will share how their state embraced the two-gen approach to promote meaningful systems change. We use the remainder of the time for a question and answer session. If you do have a question that you'd like to ask towards the end of the webinar, you can either raise your hand and I will unmute your line, or you can use the chat function and we'll read the question out loud for the group and have whoever it's directed to answer the question. So I want to start by introducing our speakers for today. The first speaker we have is Alexandra Cawthorn Gaines. We affectionately call her Alex around here at NGA. Alex serves as our program director in the Center for Best Practices in the Economic Opportunity Division, where she supports staff and state policymakers in strengthening their human services delivery system. Her areas of focus include two-generation state policy, which is why she's here today, child welfare reform, juvenile justice, and place-based approaches to serving low-income families. Alex has served several roles in the Economic Opportunity Division, including senior policy analyst and policy analyst. Before joining NGA, she served as a research associate at the Center for American Progress, where she worked with the economic policy team as a legislative assistant for the United States Committee on Banking, Housing, and Urban Affairs. She also served as a Bill Emerson National Hunger Fellow with the Congressional Hunger Center. Alex holds a Master in Political Management from the George Washington University and a Bachelor of Arts in Psychology and Urban Studies from Vassar College. Also joining us today from the Georgia Department of Early Care and Learning, we have Laura Wagner. Before recently moving into the role of Community Outreach and Partnerships Director, Laura served as a Family Support Director for the Child Care and Parent Services Program at the Georgia Department of Early Care and Learning, also known as DECAL. In this role, she co-led the effort to integrate more meaningful early childhood and family resources into the work conducted by regionally based CAPS program staff. While at DECAL, Laura has also served as the agency's Early Education Empowerment Zone Director. In this role, as a project lead for the Georgia's Early Learning Challenge Grant, Laura assisted local teams with infusing strategic early childhood resources into ongoing or new community planning efforts, and also led efforts to drive data-informed community conversations centered on quality-rated and CCDF subsidy in the 4 E3Zs, which is the Early Education Empowerment Zone. Also from Colorado, we have joining us Tara Smith. Tara currently serves as the State 2-Gen Program Coordinator for the Office of Governor Jared Polis, and is supporting the statewide adoption of two-gen approaches in Colorado by partnering with representatives from state and local government, nonprofits, businesses, research, and the philanthropic community to embed two-gen across programs, policies, organizations, and systems. Her work at the governor's office has included the development and implementation of Strengthening Colorado Families, Colorado's State two-gen action plan, a blueprint to coordinate and strengthen two-gen activities across state agencies. Prior to joining the governor's office, Tara was actively involved in efforts to reform the state's healthcare system. She most recently served as the strategy and policy manager for the Colorado State Innovation Model, a 4-year, $65 million initiative aimed at transforming healthcare delivery and payment structures through the integration of physical and behavioral health. I would like to welcome all of our speakers to this webinar. So I want to start off today's webinar by briefly talking a little bit about NGA and what we do here. NGA was founded in 1908 And as indicated in our name, we are the voice of the nation's governors. We serve the governors of the 55 states, territories, and Commonwealth. NGA Solutions, our center who's hosting this webinar today, is the research arm of NGA. On this slide, you will see listed all of the policy divisions within the Center of Best Practices, where we develop innovative solutions to today's most pressing public policy challenges. NGA Solutions is the only research and development firm that directly serves the nation's governors. And with that, I think we can get started on what we came to talk about today, the actual 2-gen approach. So I'm going to pass it over to Alex to get us started.
Thank you, Candace. I'll keep my remarks fairly brief so we can get to our great state examples, but I wanted to provide a bit of context for what we mean when we talk about a 2-generation approach, which is also known as a 2-gen approach. A 2-gen approach is a lens through which policymakers, practitioners, and others can really look at their policies, programs, and practices to determine ways that they can better serve whole families. This approach focuses on creating opportunities for and addressing the needs of both children and the adults in their lives together. 2-gen is not a new concept, though it has received quite a bit of energy in recent years. Programs have existed for decades that are considered 2-gen, and some of the examples of those include Head Start as well as home visiting. For a bit more context, 2-generation programs provide services to both adults and children in a family in a coordinated manner. Sometimes those programs are delivered by a single organization, but more often than not, these programs are delivered through formal partnerships with other government or community-based organizations. In recent years, we've really seen states start to make progress on what we consider 2-generation policy and systems reform or changes. Those changes really shape the conditions and rules under which programs operate, and often states are focused on removing barriers outside of the purview of individual programs to better solve families together, and usually those approaches have a larger impact than just a single program. I want to state that 2-generation programs and 2-generation policy or system reforms are complementary and they're not mutually exclusive. Strong policies and system reforms create an environment in which strong programs can thrive. And strong programs help decision makers understand which policy elements work and which ones might need improvement. Adopting a 2-generation approach to serving families does not require new laws, new money, or new programs. It's about doing work differently, really removing the burden of alignment and coordination from families and shifting it to programs, systems, and policies. Again, 2-generation state policy and systems reform involve an intentional focus on the whole family by state leaders in developing, assessing, and improving policy, practices, rules, regulations, technical assistance, staff training, performance measurement, financing, reimbursement practices, data, and a whole host of other components that are a part of key adult and child serving systems. For a bit of context on the Parents and Children Thriving Together 2-Generation State Policy Network, for 2 years, beginning in 2016, NGA, in partnership with the Center for Law and Social Policy and Ascend at the Aspen Institute, hosted an intensive technical assistance project working with 5 states, 2 of which will be represented on the webinar today, Georgia and Colorado, to adapt a 2-gen lens at the system level. Again, the 2-generation strategies that were supported through the Parents and Children Thriving Together Network, or PACTT as we called it, can be applied at the state policy level as a framework for increasing connections between state-administered programs and working across state systems to improve the lives of low-income families. States that were engaged in that cohort were supported in finding new and different ways to meet the needs of families with low incomes who often interact with siloed and complex systems. Some of the strategies that the states pursued in the context of the PACTT network included finding ways to incorporate family voice into human services programs, authentic engagement of families in those programs, improving home visiting services through the use of evidence-based improvements and education for frontline staff, as well as creating 2-generation specific programs with culturally specific changes to the communities which they were serving. Ultimately, for a 2-generation approach to be successful, it really should be connected to a state's vision of how to improve access to services, supports, and economic opportunity for all families. As states move their policy agendas for children and families forward, a 2-generation lens can strengthen the outcomes that states may achieve. So with that, I'd like to turn over the webinar to Laura Wagner, who's with the Georgia Department of Early Care and Learning.
All right, Laura, take it away.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm delighted to be with you all this afternoon and telling Georgia's 2-Gen innovation story related to our Parents and Children Thriving Together grant here. So I work at the Georgia Department of Early Care and Learning, or DECAL, where our overarching mission is to ensure the quality of early learning opportunities for children ages birth to 5. Our agency most notably rolls out the Georgia Pre-K program, which is a universal lottery-funded program that serves over 80,000 pre-K students. We are responsible for the Child and Adult Care Food Program, as well as the Summer Food Service Program, which serves meals to kids when school isn't in session. And we also handle licensing and policy compliance and provide technical assistance for child care programs. We administer Quality Rated, which is Georgia's QRIS, Quality Rating and Improvement System, which incentivizes and guides providers in going beyond and above minimum licensing requirements so that they can be rated at a 1, 2, or 3-star level. We also house the state's Head Start Collaboration Office, as well as Georgia's CCDF-funded subsidy program known here as CAPT. So today I'd like to share the context of the Georgia PACTT grant and the intentional focus of our agency and partners on early education, post-secondary education, and workforce support, what partners have been at the table, and how the conversation evolved from the initial granting of PACTT funds to establish practical and actionable partnerships, how we were able to continue in the PACTT work with partner agencies as DECAL considered granting 2-Gen innovation grants to local collaborative groups, and how we've been able to continue our agency's 2-Gen work through the shift and focus of existing programs as well as newer programs offered to the public by our agency. Next slide, please. In Georgia, our PACTT work was all about utilizing the strengths we had as a state in our state agencies. We have taken a different approach than some of the other states involved in 2-Gen work by bringing together post-secondary and workforce agencies with DECAL, which is Georgia's early learning agency. Our post-secondary agencies, which are the Technical College System of Georgia and the University System of Georgia, are very successful in educating students with a high job placement rate once students receive their degrees. And we also have local workforce investment boards who are working hard to support individuals hoping to get back into the workforce. And with the recent move of our state CCDF-funded subsidy program, known as CAPT, over to DECAL, we have the opportunity to really think holistically about the needs of families through this 2-Gen approach. In our proposal, we included the 5 key outcomes listed here on the slide. To increase cross-agency coordination and collaboration between the child care subsidy system and the workforce and post-secondary education systems, to provide professional learning opportunities on 2-Gen strategies to both state agency leaders and partners, as well as training to frontline staff, to pilot new and expand existing 2-generation strategies in 3 targeted areas of the state with existing cross-systems collaboration, to increase evaluation efforts to identify those 2-Gen strategies that maximize impacts related to school readiness and family success, and pursue policy changes to successful 2-generation strategies. Next slide, please. One of the biggest successes related to our PACTT work in Georgia was the development of a cross-agency team that has embraced PACTT and the 2-generation approach. We have learned that it is very important to gain buy-in from the correct state agency heads, as gaining support from state agencies has been vital in pushing Georgia's 2-generation story forward. One way that we were particularly successful in building momentum in this buy-in process across the board was by incorporating meaningful training opportunities into our collaborative meetings. An example of one of those meaningful trainings was that we had a researcher from the Institute of Women's Policy Research agree to join us via phone for an overview of a briefing paper, the topic of which was investing in single mothers' higher education, the costs and benefits to individuals, families, and society. And I very clearly remember how impactful it was amongst the group in hearing about completion rates for single mothers, as well as hearing about the economic impact of post-secondary attainment for single mothers over their lifetimes. Another opportunity for this group to collaborate was tied to DECAL's ability to redirect approximately $200,000 in funding to expand our two-generation innovation grants to additional communities and counties throughout the state. I'll talk more on those in just a few minutes. Next slide, please. In our PACTT work, we also commissioned a two-gen landscape analysis by the Georgia Center for Nonprofits to identify those existing two-generation strategies in Georgia that maximize impacts related to school readiness and family economic success. Also, we conducted a study to gather information and further understand the special barriers that parents face when trying to complete post-secondary education. The first survey was administered to students at Athens Technical College, and the second was administered to Athens Technical College faculty and staff. An example of these findings included that student parents were asked whom they would ask for assistance if they needed help or support to stay in school. And almost half of respondents relied on family members, while 28% relied on their partner, 11% on friends, 3% on faculty or staff, 3% on their faith community, and 4% who did not have anyone for support. And that connection to the broader family was very notable for us. These findings were not only shared with our core team leaders here in Georgia from amongst those state agencies reflected on the prior slide, but they were also shared with community leaders who represented partners and partner agencies involved in adult and child serving roles in those three targeted parts of Georgia that we focused within on our PACTT work. Next slide, please. So in partnership with the University System of Georgia and the Technical College System of Georgia, there were two new funding opportunities to pilot or expand community strategies that connected early learning, post-secondary, and workforce systems at the local level. As I mentioned beforehand, DECAL had the opportunity to redirect about $200,000 in funding towards these two-generation innovation grants at the local level, including two grant opportunities. The first being capacity building grants, which have given recipients the opportunity to explore two-gen policy change and programming in their area. This grant was offered to communities with minimal or no organized collaborative efforts on two-gen strategies and projects. And we also had implementation funding grants, which were awarded to communities with evidence of an established group of partners collaborating to advance two-gen policies and programming. Required of successful applicants were one implementation partner from each of the following category. From adult serving organizations, we looked to partners from the technical college field as well as the University System of Georgia, local workforce and development boards and/or community nonprofits serving these populations. And from child serving organizations, we look toward child care programs with a significant number of children receiving CAPS or a quality rated subsidy grant with funded slots going toward CAPS eligible families. We also had the opportunity for Head Start or early Head Start grantees be amongst this child serving group and/or community nonprofit organizations who serve children specifically. Additionally, we required that partners include at least one child and one parent or one family outcome measure from Ascend at the Aspen Institute's two-gen outcomes bank. In early 2019, Georgia Northwestern Technical College and Community Foundation, as well as the Southern Crescent Technical College Foundation, were awarded capacity building grants, and Central Georgia Technical College, as well as a collaborative group called Two-Gen Clayton, were awarded implementation grants. Next slide, please. In addition to the successes of developing our cross-agency team and expanding the two-gen work beyond the state level, we consider ourselves successful in remaining committed to our mutual approach here in Georgia. Another critical success that we had during our PACTT time was in actually changing our CCDF subsidy policy to add enrollment in an associate's degree program to count toward the activity requirement for the state's child care subsidy program. Here in Georgia, we require that families be eligible through what we call priority groups, but also that they be eligible through income and activity requirements. And so this policy change targeted the activity requirement. So the CAPS policy now allows that full or part-time enrollment in an associate's degree program at HOPE-eligible public and private institutions qualifies as a state-approved activity. And furthermore, associate's degree programs may be completed through in-class instruction or online courses. This policy change supports the ongoing collaboration with our technical college system. We continue to work collaboratively to share resources and training opportunities between frontline staff amongst DECAL CAPS and TCSG in particular, most recently with joint family-centered coaching trainings. Additionally, we're looking forward to establishing a shared portal for 2Gen resources between partner agencies, a 2Gen network website to lift up successes from amongst our 2Gen Innovation Grant partners, and through another 2Gen Innovation Summit hoped to be held in early 2020. Lastly, all relevant resources that can be directly shared with families from this collaborative learning opportunity are shared with our partners at Quality Care for Children, which houses the State Call Center for Early Childhood Resources at 1-877-ALL-GAK. With that, I will turn it back over to you all, and I look forward to answering any questions or following up with anyone from other states interested in conducting similar work.
Thank you, Laura. I appreciate you sharing what Georgia has done, especially how the state is supporting the innovation grants. That's really exciting news.
Thank you.
So at this time, I am going to turn it over to Tara in Colorado to share how this state has supported the 2Gen framework.
So good afternoon, everybody, and thank you, Laura. That was a great presentation. I'm not sure Colorado's PACTT was quite as organized, and my presentation probably won't be quite as organized as you, but hopefully can impart some good information to everybody. So again, my name is Tara Smith. I am the State 2Generation Program Coordinator in the Colorado Governor's Office. My position was actually created about 2.5 years ago, specifically to help coordinate and facilitate Colorado's participation in the PACTT Network. So I have a great deal of personal gratitude for both NGA and the Center for Law and Social Policy. And also a great deal of gratitude for Georgia, our cohort mates, I guess is what you would call it. I think really one of the strengths of the PACTT opportunity itself was the diverse group of states that were participating. I think we all were at a little bit of a different point, kind of on our own 2Gen timeline and continuum, and we all had very different areas of focus, but that really allowed us to interact with and learn in a different way, and generated a lot of pilferable ideas, I will say. Our former governor used to call that enlightened larceny. So before I go through some of the specific achievements that Colorado was able to achieve through PACTT, I wanted to take a quick step back and offer kind of a brief history of our 2Gen journey to date. I think that's important really to kind of understand where we were, so you can understand that both the challenges and the opportunities that we face, that we're currently facing, and that we have as we move forward in this work. So as Alex mentioned in her introduction, 2Gen is not new. In a lot of places it's been going on for decades, and Colorado is one of those. So, if you take Florence Crittenson into account and programs like that actually dates back to 1893. But they only gave me 5 slides and 15 minutes, so I decided to start Colorado's journey a little bit up in the timeline, really in the 1970s, where we had, at the local level, some innovative leaders and nonprofits really start to embrace this idea of holistic services for families. And, that wasn't based on any kind of actual intellectual exercise of a model that had gears or a whole family continuum. It was really just reflecting the reality in their communities and understanding that if we really want to impact and affect the people that we work with, we need to be looking at them in the family units across generations as they live. And we really needed to be thinking about holistic or wraparound services if we're going to actually break that cycle of poverty. The Warren Village that you see here in 1975 is one of our early long-standing examples of a great program that serves low-income single-parent families here in the Denver area, again, across multiple domains. So safe and affordable housing is a key component of that, parent services, and early education. As we get into the 1990s, we had our state legislator kind of jump into this field for the first time. They authorized what was initially a pilot program. It was a public-private initiative that was really designed to help vulnerable families by setting up family resource centers, which were designed to be really a safe, accessible place that families could go to get access to comprehensive coordinated services. So what started as that initial pilot at 5 sites has now grown into a network, a statewide network of 29 centers that now serve about 72% of the counties in Colorado. And so as we get to the 2000s, we have counties starting to really engage in this kind of work. Colorado is a local control state, which some of you on the line may be familiar with, and in similar situations. That means we are state supervised but county administered. So state helps with funding and provides guidance, but service delivery is really dictated at the county level. And so we saw some of our more innovative counties really starting to see how having these siloed programs and services was really fragmenting families' access to the support that they needed. And so started thinking about how can we kind of think beyond some of those boundaries. So you had Boulder County combining housing and human services. At the state agency level, kind of where I live, and it just most of the time, really a key leader for Colorado has been our Department of Human Services. And so around 2011, 2012, we had a new administration coming into office and a new executive leader that really wanted to define a vision for that agency. I would be remiss not to mention that Colorado's longstanding partnership with Ascend, which is a policy branch of the Aspen Institute, for those of you who aren't familiar with it, that is really a national leader in helping advance the adoption of two-gen approaches. We started a very fortuitous partnership with them at that time. So Ascend was able to provide partnership, technical assistance, and really working with the leadership at the Department of Human Services and starting to drive that shift in thinking and in culture away from just how do we manage this complicated network of different programs and funding streams, and kind of look up and arrive at this vision and this combined goal of, are we serving Colorado families and are we preparing them for a 21st century economy? So I think critically, Ascend helped in that, really establish that at the executive leadership level. Georgia mentioned the importance of having that type of leadership on board with this project. I would also add one of the key features of DHS's journey is really taking the time to infuse that throughout the culture of the organization. So I think with 2Gen, we think a lot about kind of horizontal connection and communication across different departments or different programs, but really that vertical conversation. So engaging not just executive leadership, but the deputies, the program managers, the program staff, the frontline workers, really giving them time and space to engage with this idea, to buy into this concept, and making sure they really feel supported and empowered to make the changes in their daily activities that really are where the rubber hits the road with 2Gen. So 2017, we're now coming to the end of that administration. We had a two-term governor. We had some key stakeholders in the state come together and really start thinking about this idea of a statewide vision for Colorado, which I'll talk a little bit more about in just a minute. But the idea is we've now got all these different great activities, all these kinds of different dots on our timeline. How do we connect those together? How can we come up and start thinking more strategically so that as a state, we're really using 2Gen to catalyze systems change? So at the end of 2016, right as this vision was kind of coming into focus, the PACTT opportunity came up. So for Colorado, PACTT was really about operationalizing and starting to implement that statewide vision. Also, if you look at that timeline, a lot of states out there had an election in the fall of 2018, and we were one of those. So we knew there was going to be an upcoming change of administration. So we also wanted to make sure we were building momentum and really helping clear the way for a smooth transition to a new administration. I think those engaged in 2Gen work know that it's a marathon, not a sprint, and it involves a lot of handoffs between one administration and another. We wanted to make sure we were setting up a new administration for success. So if you want to go to the next slide. So in terms of the statewide vision, there's actually this resource out there, the Colorado Guide to 2Gen, that I'd be happy to share with anybody who would be interested in doing a deeper dive into the details. But really, the idea behind this was to unite stakeholders and think about ways that we could kind of connect the centers of excellence that we just talked about. The work in Colorado obviously had a strong foundation in human services, and so these stakeholders are really looking about how can we expand that to take 2Gen to kind of the next level in Colorado. We knew it would take extending that beyond just human services and really engaging education and workforce and healthcare in a way that we hadn't before, and also engaging cross-sector partners. So outside of just state government, who are those nonprofits? Who are those business leaders? Who are kind of members of the research and policy think tank community? And the key partners, of course, philanthropic organizations. So coming up with strategies to really come together around this vision of Colorado as a state in which 2Gen strategies really are embedded and integrated into the work of state agencies and local and community partners. So there are kind of 5 key areas outlined here that we knew we wanted to hit. If we're going to kind of get to 2Gen 2.0 in Colorado, we knew we needed to be addressing data systems and evaluation. We know that measuring and accounting for outcomes for children and parents is foundational to 2Gen. So do we have the capacity to do that? Spoiler alert, we don't yet, but we're making good steps toward getting there. Funding, obviously, trying to find, we know that funding for 2Gen approaches, it's hard to find a single funding stream that will support the comprehensiveness of the 2Gen approach. So how do we find additional flexibility in state and federal dollars? Organization and collaboration, again, just based on the history you've heard so far in Colorado, there's a lot of resources. So while kind of raising awareness and educating stakeholders about 2Gen is an ongoing part of our story, really PACTT was more about how do we organize and collaborate and start coordinating these resources so that we're able to maximize input, maximize the value of those without duplicating efforts. Communications, obviously coming up with strong messaging around 2Gen, particularly as you start to engage cross-sector partners. You find that certain words mean something to someone in healthcare that have a completely different meaning to someone in early childhood education. And so understanding and kind of creating that common vocabulary and lexicon around this shared goal of serving families. And then finally, policy and practices. What are those big P and little p levers? So I think our opportunity coming into PACTT was really having this great body of work existing. And so we came into this with a big, broad goal. I think Georgia, had its focus around, really connecting early childhood with postsecondary and workforce. We went pretty big. We said we wanted to expand the adoption of 2Gen approaches across state, county governments, state, county, and local governments, and engage cross-sector partners that I've mentioned, the nonprofits, the businesses. So for us, the challenge is how do you take that and operationalize that into a game plan for a 1.5-year long initiative? So I think 2 of the things we decided early on, one was that we wanted to set some specific goals around PACTT that included things like, the number of state agencies that we were able to engage, the number of programs and activities, the number of collaborations we were able to create, any changes that we could make to funding strategies. Those were the wood dates, some of the things that we used to mark our progress. And then the second thing we really wanted to do is be able to engage agencies and organizations wherever they were in their 2Gen journey. So for us, whether our state agency was very sophisticated, something like a Department of Human Services, or if they were brand new to this work, we really wanted to start increasing the adoption of these approaches. So if you want to go ahead and click to the next slide. So I think one of the key outcomes or deliverables, if you will, for Colorado for PACTT was the Strengthening Colorado Families, the State 2Generation Action Plan that was actually mentioned in my bio. What this is a listing of the different activities that are underway within state government in Colorado. So I mentioned one of our outcomes we were looking at is how many state agencies would be able to engage, knowing that we were starting with DHS. Early on, we thought if we could engage 3 or 4 different agencies in meaningfully thinking how they can start bringing a 2-gen lens to their work, whether that's a policy, whether that's doing education with their staff or with some of their key partners, kind of anything was welcome. We ended up with more than 3 or 4. We actually ended up with 12 different agencies that came around the table and identified about 65 different activities across those different domains, and that we just kind of talked about: programs, policy, funding, data, communications, and actually created this document to list those in a single centralized location. And the idea behind this was not to just go to NGA and CLASP and say, look at the wonderful work we did, but really to have this be an iterative document that agencies could continually update to show their ongoing commitment to the adoption of 2Gen. We also wanted this to serve as a tool for engaging with some of those cross-sector partners. So the idea of having, again, activities that are going on with state government in a place where if I'm a philanthropy and, hey, I think I really want to try to support 2Gen approaches, I can go and look and see what is occurring within state government that I could potentially partner on or support. Or I can also look at that framework and identify a gap that I could maybe approach someone to partner with. So really this idea of making this an interactive tool, both to demonstrate ongoing agency, the increasing adoption across state government, but then also building those cross-sector partnerships. So I'm getting close on time. I think if you want to go ahead for the next slide. I think another key benefit for Colorado in terms of PACT participation is stakeholder engagement. And I picked this one because I think this was a lesson that was applicable probably across all 5 states in terms of the power of convening different stakeholders around this idea of serving families better within a state. And so one of the things that we did, we held a statewide conference. I think several other states did that as well, really to bring leaders from across the states, Colorado being a big square state, to help us think and iterate on ideas for moving 2Gen forward. We also used quarterly webinars. That was another tool. Set up a website. One thing that I will note for a state who's not represented on the call, Minnesota has created a 2Gen policy network, which is an amazing resource out of their participation in PACT. So if you go and you Google MN 2Gen Policy Network, you can see a great example of a tool that areas for enlightened largely by Colorado. And then I think in terms of sustainability, one of the things we were thinking about coming up on a transition, I have on the slide here alignment with other initiatives. I think actually embedding into other initiatives is a better way to frame that. So this idea that, and I think Alex said this really well, this is a framework that can be used. There's not kind of a separate 2Gen initiative that exists in a state or a specific 2Gen policy. It's by bringing this multi-generational lens to existing initiatives that you're really helping to ensure that multi-generational focus and ensure that equity lens gets applied. So if you want to go ahead, I'll go on to my last slide. So that was kind of those were some of the key things that we were able to achieve through PACT, really start moving the needle down the road for that broader adoption of 2Gen within Colorado. New governor came into office in January, and you can see from one of his opening lines of the state, very interested in a Colorado for all, a state where everyone can earn a good living. They're very much a 2Gen lens, I think, in terms of our new administration and priorities. I think some key areas that we've just seen that so far in the area of education. I've never seen a more passionate advocate of investing in early childhood as one of the most productive and valuable investments a state can make. So we had a big push this year for a full-day kindergarten. Are now kind of shifting focus a little bit to really be thinking about, now that we kind of have that line drawn, how are we thinking about a universal path to preschool and really investing in that early childhood space. And by doing things like full-day kindergarten, opening up opportunities for parents to be pursuing their own education, those sorts of things. I think in terms of healthcare costs, Another key area, we know that the high price of healthcare can really serve as a barrier for families. So looking at some ways Colorado actually has passed a reinsurance program that hopefully will get federal approval, which will really provide some relief from premiums in key parts of the state. But I've also started some work to really look at our behavioral health care system. We know that mental health, substance abuse issues really impact across generations and across different members of the family. So looking at ways that we can improve that kind of care. So in terms of I know I'm a little over here. So in terms of some quick lessons from Colorado, and then we can open it up for questions. I think really one of the lessons of PACTT was the importance of creating an ongoing mechanism for cross-agency communication. I think Georgia also kind of highlighted this with the 5 agencies they had at the table. And in Colorado, what we found, there was a lot. It's not that agencies weren't collaborating, but it was usually on a very issue or project-specific basis. So PACTT allowed us to create kind of an ongoing conversation, which brought a multitude of actors, 12 different agencies around a table, to really be intentional in thinking about how we're serving families. I would say, don't forget about data sharing. I'd say as a key element of 2Gen and thing to consider. There's a joke in my office that it's not a meeting until Tara talks about data sharing. So we'll put a plug in for that. 2Gen really is kind of the ultimate case and the need for data integration across different agencies. Data was actually the key to engaging some of the partners that were new to the 2Gen table in Colorado, particularly the Department of Corrections and our Department of Higher Education. And then finally, just to note, this takes time. This is about systems change, but even, a few steps further upstream from that, it's really about culture change. It's about mindset change and taking the time to build the partnerships and build the relationships so you can start establishing those levers that will really help move the work forward in your state. So I will stop there and open it up for questions.
Thank you, Tara. I especially appreciate your point on using the 2Gen framework to incite culture change. I think that is really important. And then you also gave some very practical tips in terms of making sure that folks are having the conversation about culture, that vertical conversation, as you called it, within their agencies, making sure they're thinking meaningfully about the cross-agency and cross-sector collaboration, and then doing some education so that folks are speaking the same language. So thank you for that. I'm gonna open both you and Laura's line for this session on the question and answer. Right now, I'm gonna invite folks to ask their question either via the chat function, or you can raise your hand and we will unmute your line. If you decide to ask a live question, I would just ask that you introduce yourself and your organization before asking your question. Okay, so we have one question from the chat function from Beth, and it says, have there been any initiatives in states or within NGA that have taken a multi-gen approach and addressed the 3+ generations, often raising families, and how to integrate grandparents and senior programs into this great work? Laura or Tara, do you guys want to take a stab at this question?
I'm happy to take a start. I love this question, Beth. I think you've really hit the nail on the head. I think, as Colorado has been thinking about 2Gen, and even when I'm out talking about it, it really is this idea that that's a very inclusive definition of family. But I think just 2Gen itself kind of lends itself to that thinking around parent and biological child. So there's a senior advisor on aging here in the governor's office, and we have been actively engaging in a conversation about this over the last few months. How can we really expand this idea of 2Gen so it really becomes that multi-generational umbrella? And more, I think explicitly, it's not that I think 2Gen excludes older, the aging population, but really being more intentional in highlighting that as part of the conversation. I will say that Colorado has had a similar conversation with Connecticut, who also kind of had that same philosophy and approach. and would love to kind of engage with other states and some brainstorming around what that could look like. How do you expand that lens?
Right. I would definitely agree with you, Tara, about the thinking about and being not just the parent, but the wider family. We certainly embrace that here in Georgia. However, I do acknowledge that our 2-gen work has started strategically with post-secondary institutions who primarily support student parents. And though it may not necessarily be exclusive to just parents rather than older generations of families, I do acknowledge that our approach has been more intentionally focused toward a younger demographic here. We do have in Georgia, through our Child Care and Parent Services subsidy program, our CCDF funded subsidy program, we have a priority group that we support, which is grandparents raising grandchildren. So much like we support children who are in the foster care system, or children in families with very low income, or children experiencing homelessness through our priority groups here. Grandparents raising grandchildren are one of our priority groups of families that we do seek to support through our CAPS scholarships. And we are working really hard to align those scholarships into quality rated programs here in Georgia, which we're very proud of setting a deadline that by the end of the 2020 calendar year, all programs that support children in the CAPS program must be quality rated at a 1, 2, or 3-star level. So in thinking about childcare in itself as a 2-generation strategy or a multi-generation strategy and support, I could say that that's one way in which our agency and our state supports a multi-generation approach.
Thank you. So I want to continue to encourage folks to ask their questions both via the chat or the raise their hand function. While we wait for some more of those questions to come through, I have a question that I think would be interesting for both you, Laura, and Tara to respond to for participants. We've learned from Asim, who is a big partner in this space, that it's very important to incorporate the family voice and have real-time feedback loops as you are thinking about how to use the 2-gen approach in your state. Can both of you talk about how you have incorporated or listened to the family voice during this process, or plans that you have in the future to do this?
That's a really great question. And I would say that through kind of our landscape analysis that we conducted through PACTT, we got some great feedback from community partners that serve families. Although I think that the connection of having feedback directly from families was not included as intentionally as feedback from community partners throughout the state, as that feedback was. However, I would say that we are working to build a leadership group from amongst families that we support through the CAPS program, so that there can be a feedback loop from between families and our CAPS leadership as policies continue to evolve and change over time. And so I think that that's probably the best way that we plan to incorporate family voice into some of the programmatic changes we see here at the agency.
Great. Tara, did you have anything to add?
Sure. Again, another great question and issue to raise. I think, you know, in Colorado and the agencies that we had around the table, some of them had more established mechanisms for really engaging family voice than others. One of the interesting things we did with that group was actually we were interested in looking at how different agencies were actually trying to engage that voice, whether that was, how often were different agencies reaching out? What did that look like? Were they actually sitting down and inviting parents? Was that done through surveys? And part of that was just to understand how many places state government may be kind of touching the same people over and over again and asking questions. And part of it was really to understand kind of the depth and meaningfulness of those interactions. One of our interesting kind of findings coming out of that was that a few agencies actually were, kind of questioning what did they actually interact with families? Was that really their client? So, so something like the Department of Education was like, well, we really serve schools and school districts. So I think just the framing of that question itself was a good learning experience for us in Colorado. One of the pieces of work that I will note that has come about is the development of a great new Family Voice Council within our Department of Human Services that is really taking off and doing amazing things. So if people are interested in finding out more about that, I'd be happy to put you in touch with the person that leads that program.
Okay, thank you. We have another question that came in via the chat that says, what is something you wish you had known at the beginning of your state's 2Gen work that you know now? I mean this from the perspective of creating coalitions and getting everyone at the table to engage in the work. Thank you.
Well, I could say from Georgia, I think I mentioned earlier on in the webinar that it is really important to gain buy-in from the right people at the right agencies. So it's really important that that top-level leadership remain engaged and informed as to the goals of the state's 2Gen or multi-gen strategy. And that has helped us in many ways move our work forward, especially in having the interest of the governor's office in this work. Truth be told, that was, I think, one of the primary drivers in bringing people to the table initially here in Georgia. But also equally as important is obtaining buy-in from the local level, because those who are at the local level, of course, are the main operators of the 2Gen work, and we also need to understand their importance in creating as well as sustaining programs. So I think engaging local leaders early on in targeted communities, as well as making sure that the right people from the right agencies continue to be engaged and involved. And some of the ways that we did that here in Georgia not only was having the focus of the governor's office, but also continuing to provide training opportunities as to what we mean by 2Gen or multi-gen work, and having the ability to actually demonstrate what we have done over time. And the 2Gen innovation grants started as an idea from our agency here at DECAL. We wanted to repurpose funds that had been given to one program in the metro Atlanta area to a more wide distribution across the state in looking at 2Gen. But we asked those partners at the table what we should, we gave a framework for what we were thinking of doing with the funds, but out of that conversation, they wanted to see more possibility for those at the local level who were just at the capacity building stages. Given what we learned, at our own table of building our capacity at the state level, we wanted to give those at the local level the same opportunity to explore what 2Gen or multi-gen really means. So I would say that's kind of what we learned.
Tara, do you have anything that you wish you would have known at the beginning that you know now?
I think kind of expanding that to Colorado's broader 2Gen story, I think I think in our experience, it's generally actually not that hard to get certain stakeholders around the table. you know, 2Gen just is such an intuitive idea. Like it makes sense, this idea of serving families, and that to do that we need to be thinking across, you know, the fragmentations and systems, and we know intergenerational outcomes. So I think for us, it hasn't been so much the enthusiasm and partners being willing to come around the table. It's that kind of what's next, or then what does that mean, and having the dedicated time and resources to do that. So I would say part of DHS's success was creating a 2Gen position, a full-time position that could actually be doing that outreach and coordinating the cross-division and department meetings to really make sure that things were being followed up on. In a lot of cases, 2Gen, you know, somebody might get assigned to do that as maybe the second or third committee that they're on, and it can be hard to keep that at the forefront of your mind. I would say for us, it's been about understanding the time commitment and the resources to really support people as they're really starting to make the both cultural and then structural changes as to adopt the approach.
Awesome. Well, we are just over time, so I want to thank both you and Laura and Tara for sharing your state stories. I hope that it was very beneficial to everyone that has joined us today. Before we end, I do want to let everyone know that this webinar has been recorded, so it will be available on the NGA website and via all of the newsletters sent out by the Economic Opportunity, Health, and Education divisions to those who are on our listservs. Another webinar is coming up on Thursday, August 22nd from 3 to 4 p.m. And the topic there will be home visiting. So if you're interested in or want more information about that webinar, feel free to shoot me an email. My email address is kdriscoll, that's KDRISCO@nga.org, and I'm happy to share that information. And thank you for joining us today. I hope that you guys found this information helpful and useful as you use the 2Gen network to support greater well-being for families that you serve. Thank you.